All right, so brief introduction of myself. I'm Antoine. I think Shakori is the only person I don't know. But I'm a licensed clinical social worker in this area. Been in social work since 2004, and I'm in mental health. I have a private practice, and but this is probably one of my most favorite things to do is test prep class, because really your degree doesn't really carry a lot of weight if you don't have a license. And so you can have a master's degree and that's fine, but the ultimate goal for all of us is that we become licensed at the highest level. And for those of you all who may not know, Louisiana is a part of a compact that's actually happening right now. There's only 7 states involved, but they only needed 7 states to get started. um, where we'll be able to, once you get licensed in one state, that license will carry over into another state without going through the rigmarole. So by the time some of y'all get licensed, that compact may already be in place. So once you get licensed, you'll be able to use your license in other states without taking another exam, paying fees, and all of that. So Louisiana is one of the states that did get involved in that. So um, I'm super, super excited about that. Hey, Tanisha, good morning.
Good morning, Antoine. I was at your church knocking on the door. I hear people
Ah,
inside. And,
no,
yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah, it was
It's
Zoom on. That's why I didn't put an address on there. I know you're
it's
used to me
okay.
being in person.
Yes, it's okay. I can't write anything until I stop, so I'm gonna drive back and then
You're
I'll be
fine.
listening. All
Yeah, that was just God telling you it's time to come to the church, Tanisha. But we'll talk about that later. We'll talk about
right. Okay.
that. So really quickly. Oh, Tanisha, you want to introduce yourself? We did introductions.
Hello. Okay. Hello, everyone. My name is Tanisha Lyons. Some know me by Tanisha Wilson, but I am a LMSW. I'm here in Shreveport, Louisiana. I work for Willis Knight Health System as a transplant social worker, and I am trying to take my LCSW. I kind of gave up on it, so I stopped taking it. So I've gained some confidence and more faith and belief that I can pass it. So that's why I'm here today.
Awesome. You'll pass it. I tell people the only way you don't pass this examination is you stop taking it. I met a young lady who came to me, who had taken it 23 times, and she's from New Mexico. No, I'm sorry, 13 times. And we just found out it was just a little tweak she needed. She passed it on the 14th time. When you get your license, it ain't gonna say how many times you took it. It's just gonna say license, LCSW, LMSW. So for those of you all who've haven't passed, you taken it before, you haven't passed your examination, don't worry. Just keep pushing at it. Just keep pushing at it. All right. So let me share my screen. So we'll go into 5 things today. We'll take a couple breaks in between. We'll go into 5 things. One, I always start the workshops talking about just preparing for the exam, some things that I think that are important. And then we'll go into 50 top 50 top topics of things you should know for your examination. We probably will only get to like, I probably would stop at like 25. Um, and then we'll get into some assessment, intervention, and treatment planning today. And we'll get into breaking down some practice questions. And then after that, I'll do Q&A. So let me share my screen. And if you have a question at any time, you can either jump in or you can use the chat feature. All right, let's talk about this um, examination. So, quickly, knowing the breakdown of your exam, is important. It isn't really that big of a deal, but it is important. Um, so for those of you all who are taking the master's exam, those who are taking the LCSW exam. So in 2011, they had a breakdown of the examination, the percentages. They changed that in 2018, which is the breakdown that you guys are up under now. So if you're taking the master's exam, just know the biggest part of your exam is going to be HIPC, Human Development, Diversity and Behavior and Environment. That is the biggest part of your exam. Theories, um, knowing types of groups and things like that. That's going to be the biggest part of your exam. I'll get into that later. The second biggest part of your exam is going to be professional relationships, values, and ethics. I encourage everybody in here, if you have not, please read the NASW Code of Ethics. I know there's some people who are social workers who have not. Usually, when you're in graduate school, you are encouraged, if not required, to read it. But it is important that you read it, in particular with us having some changes a couple years ago around technology and stuff like that. So if you have not read it, please read it. Um, and it is free on Google. You can just Google it. Yes, Kamika, this is the information. Well, it's the information actually from ASWB's website. They give us this breakdown. Also, Chevelle, I saw your question about using our license in other countries. Other countries have their own regulations. As far as the interstate compact I was talking about, that's only for the United States, and it is also for some neighboring regions in Canada, but not in other countries yet. Then you have assessment and treatment planning and interventions for clients are the same percentage, so those really didn't change. But just knowing the biggest percentage of your exam is HIPS. All right, if you're taking a clinical exam, the biggest percentage of your exam is going to be assessment and diagnosis. Right, so with those who are getting ready to become LCSWs, you definitely need a DSM-5 or something like a DSM-5 made easy. I've seen different types of books out there. There's like maybe like DSM-5 simplified, but you need something that's going to have the major diagnoses in it, and you have a familiarity with those diagnoses and specifically the characteristics. Those that are taking the master's exam, you'll need that as well, but primarily those that are studying to become LCSWs. The smallest percentage of that exam is going to be around ethics because they figure by the time you're an LMSW, you should have a working knowledge of values and ethics in our profession. So some things I just recommend. This is just based on my experience and the things that I saw that have been successful in helping people pass the exam. I mentioned before a DSM-5. Also, I would encourage you all to get a social work dictionary, not only just for your exam, but it's just good to have because you're in the profession. And there's just certain terminology that you may not know that you'll use your social work dictionary to look up. I think uh, when you have good study habits as it pertains to like let's just say you're breaking down questions or you're answering questions for your exam. Sometimes people have the tendency to read an exam question, and if they see like a term or a word that they don't know, they'll just keep going and keep reading the scenario without um, researching what that term is or researching what that law is or what that code is. And what you want to do when you're studying is not about how many questions you study, but you want to make sure that all of the words in your question you understand. Like when you saw the Disabilities Act of 1990, you knew what that was. You didn't just keep reading and like, oh, I don't know what that is. Let me try to answer the question. So that's where your social work dictionary comes in to be able to help. Talked about the code of ethics. And then if you go to ASWB's website, which everybody has already visited if you've signed up for your exam, for those who haven't, that's the site you'll go to. If you go to aswb.org, they have an examination guidebook. I encourage everybody in here to get an examination guidebook. I'll show that in a second. But the examination guidebook tells you from A to Z what's going to happen as it pertains to your exam. How do you get registered? How do you get licensed? But more importantly, it has a breakdown. It has a breakdown of each one of the areas on your social work exam. I remember when I was first doing test prep, we did not have a guide to what was going to be on the exam. We just had to guess. Well, in 2018, they changed it. They told us this is what's going to be up under HPSI. This is what's going to be under assessment and diagnosis. And so that changed the game. Like we saw pass rates go through the roof once that happened because now we can see what's going to be on the exam. So I'll talk about this a little later. So I would encourage you all to get that and use that as a checklist. That will be your checklist. This will help you to see if you're prepared to take your exam. I'll talk about that in a second. And then the last thing is probably more of a smaller recommendation, but I do highly encourage it. ASWB does offer, and some of you have probably already taken that. They do offer an online practice exam. It's $85 to take the exam. But listen, there's all types of study material floating out there. I'll talk in a second about, what study material to use. There's all types of material out there, but listen, none of it is going to be as close as you can get to preparing for your exam, like the actual ASWB practice exam. There's some great study guides out there. But if I'm looking for a study guide, I want to look for something that's made by the people who made the test. And so that it's probably going to cost you, it's going to cost you some money, $85, but I believe that it's well worth it. It's well worth it. So, especially if you've taken your exam and you're missing it by a wide margin, I would encourage you to make the investment into getting that online exam. All right, questions so far before I move on? So talk to me. Who that is preparing for their exam has a study schedule and who um, does not have one and is preparing for their exam. If you don't, it's not a big deal. Most of us hadn't been taught how to have a study schedule. Who has one? I'd love to hear about your study schedule. And who,
I have one. I basically study every day of the week, Monday through Friday. I just don't study on the weekend.
good.
Either early in the morning after I drop my son off or late at night once everybody goes to bed. Just depending on how the day goes. But I study Monday through Friday.
Awesome. Okay.
Time varies depending on what subject I'm studying because I'm stronger in some areas than others. So time varies there.
Okay, gotcha. Anyone else? And if y'all do me a favor, if you're not on video, can you tell me who this is? Because I can't see who you are, who's talking. I want to make sure I know who I'm talking to.
I'm sorry, it was
Oh,
Shakoria.
you're good. You're good. I just can't see who you are. Okay. Anyone else have a study schedule?
Mine's is similar to Shakoria's right
Okay.
now. I would like to critique it, but like she said, it really depends on what topic I'm studying. Um, my problem areas, I kind of do extend it out additional 30, 35 minutes, but yeah, it's kind of similar to hers.
I got you. Okay. And for those of you all who'd like for me to individually look at your study plan, you can contact me and let me know. Um, I think all of y'all may have my number. If not, um, Shavella, can you put it in the chat for me? And then you can contact me. I'll help you with it. But I'll give you my recommendations. This is just my recommendations, as you know, what I've seen be successful. So I think if anybody's being really serious about passing their exam, I think you at least need 90 days of serious study. The only time I would recommend studying less than 90 days to prepare for this exam, um, you know, you've just taken it and like you just missed it. And you missed it by 1 or 2 points. Then maybe you can afford not to have a rigorous study schedule. And then I wouldn't really even, you know, I wouldn't advocate for that either. But this exam is going to take a portion of our life that's probably more sacrificial. Like for 90 days, at least 90 days, you will have to be locked in. Um, thank you, Shavella. Um, and so at least 90 days. So let your family know, that they may need to make some adjustment. You're probably not gonna be able to cook every day, right? You need to study. So have your spouse to help you out. Get your mom to bring you some dinners over because you got to lock in. 90 days of your life can change the rest of your life. And so sometimes people come to me and they say, well, I've been studying for 6 months. Well, when we break down the actual time frames, what they were invested in, they weren't studying for 6 months. They may have studied consistently 2 days here, then maybe another day here, then an hour here, and then they were studying while holding the baby, studying while cooking. All of that is fine, but it's not real study time, right? And so when we're talking about study time, we're talking about you and your material with no distractions, no TV, no cell phones. If you can help it, no other people in your environment unless it's a study group. That's what we're talking about. And my personal um, belief is that your study session um, can only be 50 minutes. I know sometimes people feel more accomplished if they've studied for longer hours, but the truth of the matter is you're only able to retain information at about 50 minutes at a time. And so my recommendation for people who feel like they need to be into the material for longer periods of time is that you at least 50 minutes, then you take your break and then come back to the information. Because usually after an hour, you're not really learning it. Maybe you're reading it, and it gives us a sense of accomplishment because we're sitting in front of the information. Um, but really, if we're talking about no distractions, I'm invested into the information. That's about 50 minutes. 3 days a week is worst case scenario. That means I got some stuff going on in my life. I got to work. I got kids. I got family, and I can't um, get to more than 3 days a week. I would only encourage that for somebody who's like you just took your exam and you get ready to take it again in 9 days. The rest of us, 5 days is the best case scenario. You'll need to dedicate 5 days of your week to this study. But like I said, that's only 50-minute sessions. There's no distractions, and I'm into the material. 4 days is not bad, but optimally we're looking at 5. So you're gonna have to find a time where you can consistently plug in every day that you've designated to study. It does not help when we jump around with inconsistent times and days. But just because of the way that our minds are made, the way that our short-term and long-term memory is made, we want to connect the dots on a consistent continuum, right? And that means that I have predictability to my schedule. And so, if your favorite Netflix show come on at a certain time, don't schedule your study time running time because you're gonna watch Game of Thrones, whatever they watching on TV now. I don't watch TV, but that's what you're gonna do, right? You got to find a time that's optimal for you, right? So once again, I just reiterate: if you need to do more than 50-minute sessions to feel accomplished, by all means, do just take a break in between the 50 minutes. All right, questions about study schedules before we move on. Hey, Darren, it's good to see you. Mm.
I have a
Hey, Dr. Buck, can you
Yes.
hear me? What I found to be helpful when I do get a chance to study, to be honest, is I try to study at the time that I know that my brain is peaking, and a lot of times that's in the morning time.
I
If,
like that.
if I'm trying to study at 5 or 6 o'clock, it ain't gonna work. Guys. It's just not gonna work for me. Yeah. But I'm noticed I'm more sharper in the morning hour.
Gotcha.
So and to retain more in the morning hour. So I found that to be very beneficial because you got to know how your brain works and when you have the most energy and all of that good stuff. Because I try not to depend on no energy from all this. So
Yeah.
yeah, but I just
Yeah, that's a great point. Because some people morning people, some people night people, some people are afternoon people. So I like that. And if you can, finagle that in a way where you're not using that time for work or for family and for kids. I know we tend to try to use the best part of our day for the most meaningful things in our life. But he's absolutely right. If you can still away some time, you're good in the morning, but you're usually doing something else in the morning with your life. Maybe if you can set aside some study time to use for your examination, it'd be helpful. Like if you know you not a night person, you probably don't need to be getting in your bed, curling under the covers, saying I'm gonna study. Like it's not gonna happen, right? It's not gonna happen. So that's a great observation, Pastor. All right, somebody put something in the chat.
I I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Uh, are you recommending that we study at least 15 minutes a day or at a time?
50 minutes at a time, at least one time a day. At least
Okay.
one 50-minute session a day. And that's not listening to study material. That's actually you studying. Because sometimes people say, well, I was listening to a CD, but that's not actually studying. That's a part of studying, but it's not engaging the material um, in a learning environment that's optimal. Like you want to be in front of material, sitting down, reading, and focused. And so that's what I mean. And so for those of you all who would like, I'll just say this on the onset because I'm going to be using some portions of because I wrote a test prep manual. I'm not selling it because I have to update it, but I do have a test prep CD that I do sell if anybody would like to buy it. And I know people have been asking me about the defense mechanism CD that I made. I'm updating that as well to add some more defense mechanisms. And so that should be finished by next week. And so I am selling that. My website is currently down, but those of you all who would like to purchase either one of them, the CD is $50 and the defense mechanism CD is $20. If you like to, you can just text me and I'll help you get it. All right. Any other questions about study schedule? All right. All right. So this is probably more of a mental thing than anything else because a huge portion of your examination is mental. Um, the research indicates that most people who take this exam the first time pass, even though we have poor pass rates, in particular for African Americans and people of color, poor pass rates, even for our area, like in the South. But overall, nationally, people tend to pass it the first time. And so what we found from um, uh, people taking the exam and reasons why they fail, it's not in most cases because people didn't study. And it's not in a lot of cases because people didn't know the information. I've done this test prep class for a long time, for at least a decade. And there's people who've come in this class who know more of the information than I did. So in a lot of instances, it's not about not knowing the information. That's the first thing you should know is the information. But it's also this is a mental test as well. So if we're not prepared mentally for this exam, um, that those barriers can present themselves. So some top reasons that I've seen that people don't pass their exam. And I only bring these up because having a plan and a strategy and an approach for this exam is everything. So number one, flat out, is just anxiety. Some people are just anxious about taking tests. It has nothing to do with your education and your brilliance. It's just anxiety. And anxiety is the fear of the unknown. Like, what if I fail? Like some of you are having to take this exam because your job is requiring it, right? And so they told you if you don't pass, then we may have to replace you. That's a lot to be dealing with mentally before you take an exam. Or you got family pressure, right? Or school pressure, or maybe it's financial pressure. You can't really, you know, go up financially until you get this license. So all of those things can equate to just having anxiety. And so having a plan to address, if that's you, having a plan to address your anxiety is key. Because what happens is if we approach any endeavor that requires sustained attention, if we approach it from an anxious state, then our brains operate from an anxious part of our brain, which we call our brainstem. It makes it harder to solve complex problems. It makes it harder to negotiate. It makes it harder to sustain attention for long periods of time when you're anxious, because in your mind, the only thing that is focused on is survival, getting out of this situation. So there's all types of things that you can do for anxiety. I encourage people that if you are that way, there's mindfulness strategies that you can employ while you're taking an exam. I won't get into that. I've heard people talk about taking medication before they take their exam so they can remain calm. Whatever you need to use to keep you in a calm state is important, right? But you got to deal with it initially, because if we don't deal with our anxiety before we take our exam, our anxiety will deal with us. Some other reasons people don't think that they have enough time. That's not true. That's more of a mental thing. I think it's only like 1% of the people who take the exam run out of time, and that's usually because of stuff like anxiety. The third one is lack of preparation. I'm going to go through those list of items up under each one of those sections that I talked to you about. This will be a key indicator of whether you're prepared for your exam or not. And if you're not, I just would recommend that you reschedule it if you can. Number four, this is more about test prep approach. Some people heavily rely on remembering questions. Sometimes I have people in the class and they'll say, all of the questions I studied, I ain't seen none of those questions on my exam. Yeah, that's the goal. They don't want to put the questions out in the community so people can just start studying the questions. It's not about memorizing the questions. It really is about knowing the material. You may see some questions that look like some questions that you studied, but we don't study the questions to memorize the questions. Those questions that you're studying are not going to be on your exam. They're not going to be on your exam. Number five is taking the test in the wrong frame of mind. You just lost a family member, you went through some type of traumatic event, and you're getting ready to take your test, something physically or medically is going on with you. Those are just not, optimal times to be taking your exam. And then having to do it up under pressure. So I just brought those things out because we have a responsibility to ourselves to try to develop a plan as much as possible so that we're the best versions of ourselves when we get ready to take our examination. Any questions about any of that?
Dr. Butler, what you recommend for brain fatigue? Because after reading so many questions and trying to do process of elimination and things of that nature, and you got over 100 some questions you got to go on. What you recommend for brain fatigue? Because sometimes your brain can get tired while you're going through and taking that test. So,
that's a great question. So a couple of things. So when you take your exam, let me check the chat. When you take your exam, they'll give you ashwagandha gummies help with anxiety. Okay, thank you, Chevelle. When you take your exam, they'll give you 10 minutes of break time. Like you can break it up. However you want to break it up. Anyway, they give you 10 minutes. So I would encourage people, if that's your struggle, that you use the 10 minutes that's allotted to you to take your break. And sometimes you can just take the break in your seat, pausing from the information. But what you do in practice is what you do on the exam. And so that's why I'm a strong proponent of signing up to take that exam that they have on ASWB's website, because that's going to actually let you sit down in front of an exam and practice like you're taking a regular exam. That's going to help you see what your pace is with taking an exam that's 170 questions. Like, I'm taking this test. This practice exam, did it take me the whole 4 hours? Did it take me 3 hours? Like, if I answered so many questions, did I start wandering off? Did I get distracted? Did I get tired? It'll help you with that when you're actually taking the exam. And it doesn't have to just be that one. They got all types of sample exams out there that are 170 questions, where you can just sit yourself down and take the exam. So one, I just think getting familiar with sitting down for 4 hours is going to be helpful. And then the other stuff is practical stuff. Like, like don't hurt yourself. Like, make sure you get you some good rest. Make sure that you had, something to eat. Make sure that you're not studying and stuff if you can help it after you're overwhelmed or you're tired, or you've expended all type of energy throughout the day. Now you're trying to study. It's just going to be hard to not be fatigued and not be distracted and not be anxious when that's the situation. Go ahead, Tanisha.
No, I just wanted to say I think he's making some great points because for like the last, I would say year, the last time I took the test, maybe it was 2020, if that, but I noticed I started yawning through the test. I was getting extremely tired, moving, shaking. I was trying to get prescribed medicine for it. I thought maybe it was a little ADHD because the test was so long.
Mm-hmm.
And I just got so restless, and I'm like, it's something. And so it's like I would get to maybe 90 questions, and then after that, I'm just tired. And so I noticed the last 2 times that I had taken the test that was happening to me. And so I was tried to go to my PCP to get something prescribed, but they wouldn't give me anything for ADHD, that I didn't have a history of it. Well, I tried to explain that, hey, this is just starting. Like, I'm noticing I'm doing this a lot, and it's even happening at work. I can't stay at a computer for too long. I have to get up. I have to move. And so this is great information. Great information. And the gummies, I will try these.
Thank you, Tanisha, for being vulnerable, because sometimes people just won't say, that we had to put ourselves in the best position taking our exam. And I'll tell you, man,
Right.
reschedule that sucker if you don't feel prepared. Besides giving the board $260. Yeah, just go ahead and reschedule the thing. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Sharvella, you should have been a doggone doctor. Why you in social?
I have a good girlfriend of mine. She recently took her, I might mispronounce the praxis exam because she's going to be a teacher, and she shared that with me. Now, the ashwagandha I've been doing since college. I take it, it helps me right before I go to bed. It calms me down because my mind is still tossing and turning from the day because I did so much. But yeah, doctor, I don't know about that.
Yeah, I think it's in you, Sharvella.
Sharvella.
But whatever gives you the advantage, if it's legal, ethical, and moral, whatever gives you the advantage, use it. But we know ourselves by now. We've studied in college. We know our habits, like Pastor Ford talking about. We know optimally when it's the best time for us to be, dealing with people, dealing with information, dealing with an exam. And so let's just use it to our advantage. Like I said, Most people don't pass their exam not because they don't know the information. It's not that. It's just the other stuff that's involved, right? And I know some of y'all don't tell people that you're taking your exam because if you did, everybody gonna be asking you. You know, the
Yes.
anxiety. Like I'm the opposite. I want everybody to know because I want to put the pressure on myself. But some people are the opposite. They don't want all. They don't want people in their business. They want to pass it and then tell the world. Whatever works for you. You know, do whatever works for you. All right, some other tips. We talked about anxiety. I encourage everybody to find you a study partner. It's just we just learn better when it's more than just us. Maybe you don't have time to get with another person. Find somebody online. You know, get in front of a YouTube. My wife listens to a guy named RayTube. I highly recommend him. There's another guy named Philip Latrell. He does test prep. But be interactive with somebody else, engage them while you're taking your exam. But if you can find you a live person where y'all can engage and study together, that's just the best situation to be in. And then just coming into groups like this where other people are there. Maybe you're a visual learner, so maybe you need to get flashcards. Like I'm an audible learner, I need to hear, so I had audio CDs. Maybe some people need to read. Whatever your learning style is, find out what it is, and then use your test material that way. Some of you all are kinetic, like you got to put your hands on stuff and be flipping through cards and posting stuff all over the place. That's how some people learn. Whatever your learning style is, use it. Use it. All right. So, some other tips: have a positive attitude. They're just gonna put you in the best frame of mind. I talk about this when I'm going over the questions. Like trust your instincts when you're taking this exam. I do not encourage anybody to ever go back and change an answer on an exam unless only under one circumstance. If you see the answer to the question you left blank in another question. Like if I clearly see that the question I did not answer, I see the answer to it in another question, I'll go back and change it. Right. But if I mark an answer, I mark an answer. I ain't changing them. Don't go back and change it because initially that's your mind trying to recall. And sometimes people go back and start changing answers and then they start confusing themselves. Don't go back and change.
Excuse
Don't
me,
leave.
Antoine.
Go ahead, baby.
I would like to add something for the visual learners. For the visual learners, you can also YouTube animation. So they have like the animated different ways of, sharing about like the different theories and just some of the other areas of if that's your thing and your style.
Where can they find that at? I didn't know about that.
On YouTube.
On
Like
YouTube?
whatever, let's say whatever theory they're looking for, they can just type in the name of the theory and animation or just, social work theories animation.
Yeah, I like that. Okay. Everybody, that's my wife. That's my best half right there. So she's preparing. We did introduction. She's preparing to take her LCSW. You want to introduce yourself, baby?
Hi, everyone. I'm Tanisha Butler. I am preparing to take my LCSW for the first time, and it's coming up, and I'm getting ready. But I did hear him say just some of the study tips. And I just would like to encourage everyone to, this is trial and error time. Like before you get to that, the day of, figure out what works for you, figure out what your morning routine is, whatever time you take your test. Just because most people do 8 in the morning, your high point may be 2 in the evening. That may be when things kick in for you and things start rolling. But if you don't know that, this is the time to start paying attention to it and start recognizing like, when are my high points? Because I know for me, I noticed I would kind of waste time sometimes during the day, the morning, but like 1:30, 2 o'clock, I'm rolling, I'm working, I'm in my zone. So find those high points and just encourage yourself, do affirmations, whatever it is, do it and get what you need. But I'm glad to be here. I'm the program director for Choices Intercept, and we are expanding and growing. It's a child permanency program, but I'm excited to be here, and I'm just looking forward to growing in this profession with that LCSW. Woo-hoo.
Me too. Yes. I'm sorry, Darren. I didn't give you a chance to introduce yourself either. You can if you want to.
Good morning. My name is Darian Bursey, preparing for my LMSW. Currently work at Choices with Mobile Crisis. That's all.
What city are you in, Darren?
New Orleans.
You're in New Orleans. Okay. Gotcha.
Mhm.
Doc, I heard it
Awesome.
in the accent.
You heard it?
I heard it in the accent, Doc.
New Orleans.
I heard it in the good
New
morning.
Orleans.
I heard it in the good morning. So
New Orleans is only one of the cities that you can say in one word. It ain't New Orleans. New Orleans. One word.
Orleans.
One word. Glad to have you there, y'all. And you're the first person I met that's actually on that mobile crisis unit. I heard that they had started the program. I used to be the
Yeah,
clinical
November. They haven't
director.
been around long.
Oh, okay. Heard about it, but I didn't know they had actually started it. I know that. Awesome. Okay. Um, so some other tips, reframe, but for the person I get into that later. Let's see if anything else I want to show you on that. We'll talk about that later. All right. Listen, this is gold. This, like, whoever came up with this is gold. If you hear nothing else I say, please hear this. I finished my LCSW examination in an hour and a half because of this. I don't recommend nobody do that. That was my own personal testimony there between me and God. But this, I recommend. Okay. So you, depending on when you graduated, you may remember this as either the 7-step change process or the generalist intervention model. Who remembers this? All right. Okay. Awesome. Most of your questions on your exam is using this. There's like no tricks, there's no gimmicks. Like they are assuming that all of us know the generalist intervention model. The idea is that you can look at a question and you can tell what phase of social work you're in. When you can learn to do that, and I'm going to, we do a subsequent test prep class, I'm going to do that on the generalist intervention model. We won't do that today. But when you can tell what step you're in, thank you, Chevelle. It's also called a helping process. When you can tell what step you're in, it's a game changer. Because if they say that I'm meeting with such and such, right, and I'm trying to find out about where she works, what are her strengths as a person, right, and I'm building rapport with her, well, what stage am I in? What stage?
Engagement.
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 Right. So then if they say, what would you do next? What am I looking for?
Assist.
That's a lot of the questions. Right? But if I don't know that when I'm working with this person, that if I'm working on treatment goals and interventions, that is the planning stage, and they say, what would you do next? Right? When I look at my answers and one of the answers is engagement, or another answer is assessment. If I don't know that, I don't know to automatically rule those two out. Right? Because that's not what you would do next. If I'm in planning, I wouldn't engage, I wouldn't assess. So learning these to me is a game changer. And so we'll talk about that in later test prep class. But if you have not, just go reorient yourself to those 7 steps. All right, questions about that? Okay. So awesome. So let's get into some material. So you'll definitely want to write here. I'm gonna have you doing a lot of writing because it just helps you to learn. So the assumption when we're doing test prep, the assumption is we already know the information. Like we have a a brief idea of the information. So test prep classes aren't meant to necessarily teach all of the information. It's just meant to give a framework for the information that you already know. So that's what we'll do here. I'll just be talking about some general things that you should know for specific topics for your examination. But before I do that, let me do this. I do want to do this. So remember I told you all that it was helpful to get that exam guidebook on aswb.org. This is it. Who has this guidebook already? Okay, one person. Okay, this is free.
I have it.
You have it? Awesome. This is free. When you get an opportunity, please download this. And let me get to what? Go up to masters.
Dr. You can put that website in the chat.
I sure can. Shavella, can you put that in there for me? Shavella is my secretary for our social work organization. So she knows if she get on the Zoom, I just make her my secretary. So no matter what meeting we doing, we selling cookies. Shavella, can you put that in the chat? Y'all forgive the scrolling because I don't know what page it's on. So I'm just scrolling till I get to it. All right, there we go. So if you're taking a master's exam, so remember I told you, they tell you on the exam what's going to be on your exam. Like that, when they did this, is the first time they've ever done it. So I recommend that you get this outline so you can download it and you can print this out and you can take it and use it as a guide to see what you know. So let's look at what we're talking about. So for the master's exam, for the big section of your exam for somebody who's taking master's exam is HPSI. What are some of the subtopics under HPSI? So if I'm going through this checklist and if I do not know at least 70% of this information, I'm probably not prepared. Okay. Because to pass your exam, no matter what score you need, because the questions are weighted differently, you're gonna need different scores depending on the exam that you take. No matter what score you need, what they're asking you to do is at least get 70% of the questions right. Right. If I don't know at least 70% of the material, I'm probably, unless the miraculous happens, I'm probably not going to be ready to take my exam. So let's just look up under HPSI. So a subtopic is human growth and development. So they tell me this is what I need to know. I need to know theories of human development throughout the lifespan. Right? So what does it look like for a person who's an infant all the way through adulthood? Do I understand what's happening physically? Do I know things like, walking by one, talking by two? Like what happens at the age of 18 months? What should be the expectation when the kid hits childhood? What are they doing socially, emotionally, cognitively, right? That is a very straightforward type of idea. And so the reason that I'm using this chart, because some of y'all are using different study manuals, it doesn't matter the study manual that you use, as long as the study manual has these characteristics. If you have a study manual and they have not outlined this, it's not a good study manual. All good study manuals have taken these points, put it in the front of the study manual, and then gave you the information. That's why I recommend this. They don't pay me to recommend this. I just recommend LEAP because LEAP does do that. I've had an opportunity to work with several testing.
I use that.
Okay, good. Yeah, there's some good ones out there. I recommend this one. I've had an opportunity to work with a couple organizations who do test prep. Met with the people who made the exam, and from what I saw, I like Leap the best because it's a combination of the material and simplicity. Some test prep manuals you get, it looks like Greek and Hebrew, and you can't understand it. And then there's some you get, you can understand it, but it's too simple, right? It's not actually what's going to be on your exam. This is a great combination. This is not better than taking the ASWB practice exam as far as the questions are in here, but the material, because it took that outline, put it in here. Put it in here.
Excellent. They also have a DSM review guide as well.
Okay. I recommend anything Leap put out. And up to this point, I recommend it. I recommend it. So, but I'm looking for these bullet points. So I printed this out, and I have my list in front of me, and I'm going down this before I ever start studying. I want to know what I know so I can establish a baseline, right? And so let's keep going. Let's look at some other things. Theories of sexual development throughout the lifespan. Do I know anything about that? I don't have to be an expert in it. I need to have the key word here is familiarity. I need to have a familiarity of it. What are some theories of spiritual development throughout the lifespan? What are basic human needs? If I'm thinking about basic human needs, what theorist am I probably going to go to for this? For 500 points.
Maslow.
Maslow hierarchy of needs. He's going to start at the bottom, right? Gerontology. If you don't work in the field of older adults, you may not know anything about gerontology. I see you, Darian. You was like me. I didn't know nothing about you, so you have to. All we know is our grandparents. But your test prep material should have information on aging, like what normally happens to adults, elderly adults, when they go into a nursing home. What are some of the things that we know that happens?
Depression.
They get depressed.
Yes. What else?
Those are signs of depression.
What diagnosis are we normally looking at?
Alzheimer's, dementia,
Yes.
sometimes delirium.
Yes, depression, Alzheimer's of the dementia type. Absolutely. Why do we normally have to call APS when we see elderly?
Abuse.
And they're normally abused by who?
Their caregivers.
Staff.
Staff members of
staff.
the facilities.
Yeah. And their children. Yeah. Absolutely. So do I have a working knowledge of that? Body image and its impact. Do I know what body dysmorphic disorder is? Right. Feminist theory. Am I familiar with that? Like, so they tell me, let's go down a little bit more. And there's another subheading, concepts of abuse and neglect. Do I know the family life cycle? Diversity, social economic justice and oppression. Do I know the effects of culture, race, and ethnicity on behaviors, attitudes, and identity? Do I know anything about the criminal justice system? So they give us, I bring this up, not to beat a dead horse, but I bring this up because this list is your exam. So I would encourage you to take this list and go find this information in your manual and study it. That's how I would recommend that you study. Take this list, pick these topics, go find them. So if I'm studying today and my subject is HPSI, I'm going to take this list and go to these topics and say, today I'm going to find sexual orientation concepts, gender identity concepts, social and economic justice, and I'm studying. All right, y'all see how that works? Okay, so I'm constantly referring back to this list. when I'm studying, I'm trying to see how much I'm learning. So when I get ready to take my exam, I'm going to print this list out again. I'm going to go back down it, and I'm going to check off what I have a familiarity with. I should be familiar with at least 70% of the things that are listed up under these 4 headings. You don't have to be an expert. You don't have to know all of the information, all of the dates, all of the time frames, right? But you should have a working knowledge. And so what does that mean? So that means if I ask, if I say, Darian, tell me something about the criminal justice system. Like she could spit out some of the things that happen in the criminal justice system, right? That's what I'm talking. All right. Questions about that? Okay. Y'all anxiety still down? We want to keep your anxiety down. Is it still down? All right. We're not testing. I just want to share, make sure you're equipped. So sometimes just looking at the information make you anxious. All right, let me look in the chat. Oh, choline, not clonidine. Gotcha. Yeah, clonidine puts you to sleep too. All right. So let's go back to our top 50 things. We'll go to 9:30, then we'll take a 5-minute break. All right. So I'm going to go through these. I'm going to hit some highlights because the highlights are what we're looking at for the exam. And then we'll get some feedback from you all. Listen, if you don't know the information, please don't feel bad. Don't feel guilty. This is a learning environment. If you don't know it, you just don't know it. It's okay. That's why you're here. We're here to learn. I've been looking at this information for a while. There's a bunch of stuff I still don't know. And so don't feel embarrassed by that. I just want to say that. But if you don't know, it's important just to tell yourself, like, I don't know. I need to learn that. So as we're going through things, you guys have your notebooks with you. If you don't know it, write it down. Just say, I don't even know what the heck that is. That's going to help you. All right. So our first topic, child abuse and neglect. And for those, I know some of y'all are just taking your exam as well. If you see something that sticks out from the exam that you just took, please share. Because y'all are closer to the exam than I am. So child abuse and neglect, which is definitely a topic. It's going to be on everybody's exam. How many of those questions you get just depends on the exam you take. And by the way, there's only 4 exams out there. It's not a bunch of exams floating around. It's only 4. You don't know which one you're going to get, though. So knowing signs of physical abuse is important. Knowing signs of sexual abuse is important. You should know what the grooming process looks like for a child who's getting set up for sexual abuse. You want to know those steps. Anybody work for DCFS on here? Worked for DCFS before? Okay. I know my wife did. Okay.
I used to work for DCFS.
Okay. So you see a lot of this in DCFS. Signs of neglect. What's the difference between neglect and abuse? Anybody, what y'all think the difference is between neglect and abuse?
Abuse is, well, hold on, I lost my train of thought.
That's okay.
Abuse is more physical. Most times it's more physical. Neglect is more of those, I guess non-physical things too. Even though abuse can be mental, emotional.
I would say that abuse is like an intentional act but with neglect, I would say that it's family not being able to provide the basic needs for the child.
Awesome. Yeah. So abuse, and you guys are absolutely right. Abuse is acting in a way that's harmful. Neglect is withholding in a way that's harmful, right? So abuse, acting in a way that's harmful. Neglect, withholding. Like you're supposed to take your kid to the doctor and they hurt themselves, but you did it, right? So withholding. So absolutely. Sex between minors. Should know legally how that works. So when is it considered actually abuse between minors? What are the ages there? If anybody knows, like it would be considered actual sexual assault or sexual rape when it's between two minors. So for under the age of 18,
18.
right? Yeah, if we're under the age of 18, we're already considered a minor. That's what we mean by minor, under 18. And if there is a 3-year gap, then that can be sexual assault, sexual rape. So I got a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old, 14-year-old and 11-year-old, 11-year-old and 8-year-old. Right?
Gotcha.
That's the law.
So there's no I'm just asking.
Sure.
No such thing as consenting age.
So 18 would be technically the consenting age.
Okay, that's where I was going with it. Okay.
Yeah. Technically. And technically a child could give consent at 17. It's just not recognized in court.
Gotcha.
Like a 17-year-old, a 17-year-old, let's say a 21-year-old slept with a 17-year-old. And the 21-year-old said the 17-year-old consented. And she could say, I consented. It doesn't matter in court. She's a minor. So that goes into the legal term of what we call exploitation. So exploitation means that that's a word, a legal term that you may see on your exam. Exploitation means that one person had power, the other person didn't. So the 21-year-old had power based on being an adult. Even though the 17-year-old consented, they're not said to have legal power to make decisions concerning their sex, their sexuality, sexual permission, even though they may be consenting, because they say 17 years is not old enough to make those decisions independently. So that's why y'all see on the news an 18-year-old slept with a 16-year-old. An 18-year-old got locked up and got put on what's the list that they put out in the neighborhoods?
The
Sexual
sex
predators.
Sex offenders.
Yeah. And he was 18, she was 16. All right. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. That's a good question. So we are mandated reporters. So what does that mean?
We have to report any suspected abuse or neglect.
Right. If it's suspected, we have to report it. We don't have to have the evidence. We just need to have the suspicion. If we have the suspicion, then we are mandated to report. Are there ever exceptions when we have a suspicion that we actually don't report? No exceptions, especially on your exam. None. If there's a suspicion, you suspect child abuse and neglect, elder abuse and neglect, we always have to report. All right. Any questions about child abuse and neglect? Please know the steps for grooming if you don't know. And it's going to be on somebody's exam. All right. Elder abuse. We don't call CPS. We call
EPS.
not Ghostbusters. APS.
Oh, ABS. Okay.
APS, yeah, Adult Protective Services for elderly. Who is considered elderly?
65 and older.
65 and up.
65 and
Yes.
up.
65 and up. Yeah, so tell your grandmother She's still young. She's 64. We can't call APS. She don't fit. 65 and I think they're getting ready to change the age for that too. But for right now, it's 65 now. Domestic violence. So we want to know the signs of abuse. What are some of the signs of abuse for domestic violence?
Isolation from close family and friends.
That's a huge one. What else?
Visible signs like, marks on the body.
Yeah.
Looking to the partner for, like if you ask them a question and they look to their partner for the answer as opposed to
Yes.
speaking directly. Can't be
Yes.
left alone.
Yes. Showing up to your job with their pajamas on. That's the issue. Right. What about emotional signs of abuse? Domestic violence.
Depression is there.
Yes. Absolutely. Absolutely. And when it's a worst case scenario, what happens emotionally? Where can a person get?
Suicide.
Suicide. Absolutely. Absolutely. The cycle of violence. What are the steps in the cycle of violence? Where do we start?
The honeymoon phase.
Honeymoon. Say. Babe, I love you. Buying you roses. All that type of stuff. What's the next step? Then we have what you call tension building, right? So what might tension building look like? I was walking. Oh, go ahead.
Starting arguments, like nitpicking.
Yeah. Person walking on eggshells, and all of a sudden, the partner started maybe nitpicking. Maybe I accidentally dropped a plate in the kitchen, right? And the tension's built up, right? Then what's the next step?
The actual hitting.
The actual
abuse. Yes. Yes. So the actual incident occurs. Then what's the next step after that?
Back to the honeymoon phase.
Back to honeymoon. I'm sorry, I apologize. Please know that cycle of violence. Know that cycle of violence. And so what types of interventions do we create for somebody who's in domestic violence situation?
Well, safety planning.
Yeah. Like, what does that look like? What would be on the safety plan for somebody in domestic violence?
A go-to person.
Mm-hmm.
It can look like
legal assistance,
like going into a shelter, making sure they know their partner's triggers, what signs and warnings to look for. If there's children involved, being able to provide safety for your children.
Yes. Absolutely. We're probably gonna help them develop a plan. If something happens, you got your extra set of keys, you got a location to run to, all those types of things. Absolutely. Absolutely. What do we mean by legal and ethical implications? What do y'all think? What do y'all think I mean?
What are our ethical bounds, like how much we can get involved as far as domestic violence is concerned?
So what if the husband in this situation wants to get information from you because they know that he knows that his wife has been talking to you? How much of that can you share?
None.
Right. If you go to court, right, you're sitting in front of a judge. How much of the family situation is the judge looking at? Like, so if they're still married, then technically their property is still 50-50, right? Things like that. But we don't share any information with anybody who's asking. We don't let Um, perpetrators know the location of those that we're working with, things like that, which seems probably more self-explanatory than anything else. And you may see a question like this, and I know it goes against our intuition and our human nature. But I later learned out why after being in some domestic violence situations and working with people who are in them. We never tell people to leave. Ultimately, our goal is to get them to leave, but you telling them to leave as advocates, we don't do. And what are some reasons that you think we might not do?
Retaliation. It'll interrupt the therapeutic relationship.
That's number one on the exam: retaliation from them trying to leave. That's a lot of times women get killed. What else? Go ahead.
I said something about interrupting the therapeutic relationship.
Yeah. And then primarily our responsibility is to bring people to their own conclusions so that they can make their own decisions. That's our responsibility. So when you see those questions on your exam, when you're telling people what to do, you want to steer away from those answers. The only time social workers, you're telling people what to do, you see this as an exam question. Only time we tell people what to do is under certain circumstances. Only these certain circumstances. Number one, that person's homicidal or suicidal. Number two, they're incapacitated, right? They're intoxicated or they got some type of disability going on at the time, in the moment. Number three, it's some type of child abuse or neglect or elder abuse or neglect, right? Or number four, they've given you some type of consent to make decisions for them. If it's not those decisions, we don't tell people what to do. As much as you want to tell her to leave, which she should, we have to bring her to that conclusion. Right. And then once she tells us, I want to leave, then we can help her make a plan. I know I keep saying her. I know there's guys that are in domestic violence situations, but I'm just saying her because it's more women than men. All right. Questions about domestic violence. All right. We'll do one more, then take a break. All right. So we all know suicide, self-harm is important to know, especially for our exam. So when we say suicide, what are some of the characteristics of suicide? What we would call risk factors? They put people at risk for this behavior.
Trauma.
Trauma, yes. So before you guys go ahead, what's the number one risk factor for suicide? That's an exam question.
I'm guessing mental health.
Okay, close.
Family
Depression.
history.
Not family history, but that's a good one. I'll give you this example. If somebody hits you, what makes you think that they're going to hit you again, that they might hit you again?
Yes.
Why would you think they might hit you again?
Because they did it once.
So what's the number one indicator of
Oh, is it
suicide?
fear?
Previous attempt.
A previous attempt. If they've tried it in the past, thought about it in the past, the likelihood of them doing it goes through the roof. That's an exam question. So that's why during the assessment, we check to see if somebody has suicide history. Because if they have, then you automatically do a no harm contract. I don't care if it's been 50 years. Like you have to. That's just the number one indicator. All right, y'all. You all keep going. Y'all are naming some good indicators. All right. So wanting to die, guilt or shame. If people feel like they're being a burden to others, where does that normally happen at? Feel like I'm being a burden to others.
Like if there's like a long-term illness or something like that.
Yes. What population do I normally see that?
Elderly.
Elderly. There's a lot of elderly who commit suicide in nursing homes and isolation at homes by themselves because they didn't want to be a burden to their family members. And they also wanted to leave the insurance money for their families. That's huge. Extreme sadness, anxiety, agitation, hopelessness.
Unfulfilled.
Yes, unfulfilled. I heard somebody mention this. Like there's unbearable physical pain. People are prone to suicide.
Or mental, like if they suffer from auditory hallucinations.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. Some other key markers: withdrawing from friends, saying goodbye, giving away possessions, valuable possessions.
sudden
Um,
change in mood.
yes, sudden change in mood. Um, what's the most heightened window, the most prevalent time that a person is predisposed to committing suicide? What time period, what time frame is a person more likely to commit suicide? That's a
Do you
Holiday
mean
is around the holidays.
okay, that's a good guess. Around the holidays, that's more depression. It's a good guess though.
anniversaries of certain events?
Okay, those are good. It's not the primary one though, but those are right. Somebody said
At
after a
night.
manic phase.
Mm.
Okay, go ahead, Miss Bertha. You were saying something?
Like most of them do it at night when they're by themselves and there's
Okay,
no interruptions.
okay, okay. So somebody said a Monday. Man, I hear you in the room. I just don't hear you on here. I don't know if your mic is on. Um, so you know how people go to the hospital because they've had some severe depression or suicidal bout. They felt really bad when they went in, for those who work in mental health. And so when they come out, they feel good. Why do they feel well? What are some reasons?
Because they've had treatment, they've gone through treatment,
Yeah.
they've
What type of treatment?
had their medications,
They
they've
have their
had the
medication.
therapy,
Yes.
the
Yeah.
Yes.
intervention psychiatrist.
Yes. So they come out feeling good. I got my swag. I got my energy back now because I feel good. And now I have the energy to do it. Now I'm going to go do it.
Mm.
When people are
Wow.
released from therapeutic settings because they have their energy, because they feel better, they are most likely, if they are suicidal, to go ahead and do it. Not when they're depressed, not when they're down. They don't have the energy to do it. So that's why good hospitals should release people with at least a 72-hour safety plan. I'll say that for those of you all who work in mental health. If you had somebody who's been hospitalized, you must watch them for the first 72 hours. That's when they feel really well. They start writing their letters. They have the energy to gather their things that they're going to give away. They start making the plans. They're mentally in the space to do it. But remember, they're still suicidal. Their idea is still that this pain won't stop unless I kill myself. So that is a test question. That is the number one time where people are more prone to commit suicide after they've had treatment. It sounds counterintuitive, but that is the research. All right,
So
let's stop.
that is why they always say when they come out of the mental uh, facility, like Brentwood or whatever, you have to make contact with them.
You have to. You
Them-
have to. Yes.
Yes.
It should be a handoff. Like it should be when they
Yes.
release, like somebody should be there the next day. Within 72 hours, somebody needs to show up. That just has to happen. Or if not, it's just a very, very dangerous situation. And sometimes if the client has enough self-awareness, which you don't want to count on, they'll just go back because they know they're not ready. But most cases, they'll just go ahead and commit to suicide.
So it's
Yeah.
not really during the time of like emotional crisis, like
No,
an
um,
acute stress
yeah,
situation that has impacted their life significantly.
yeah.
Like a financial trouble situation or a relationship breakup or something like that. Because that's what I thought it was more centered around.
Yeah, people do commit suicide during those things. I'm just saying the most prevalent time of committing
Yeah,
suicide
right.
is
After treatment.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. People commit suicide when they get depressed, they lost their finances. There's people who go right down to Sam's Town Casino, they gamble all
And
their
jump
money
off the
away
building.
and jump off the boat and kill themselves. I know that
Right.
because I knew a guy whose job was to go jump in the water and get them. So there are people who absolutely committing suicide. But we just know people are more likely to do it when they have the energy, when they're feeling well.
Mm.
Yeah.
And two, if you're speaking from a outpatient base, if you're if you have a patient that goes in and they are released, piggybacking on what Mr. Anton was saying, within that time of release, before their release, that contact person from that institution should be especially if they were receiving counseling services previously, should be in contact with that agency to tell you, okay, such and such is being released. And from there, you start your crisis team. And then they go into an additional crisis service, but it's on the outpatient standpoint base of it.
Absolutely.
And that's usually done for like 14 days, in addition to after being released.
Absolutely. That's how it's supposed to happen. Does it
But they
always
don't.
happen that way? No.
No.
No, there's a gap in services. By the time they probably get to Darion, they probably should have been to her a week before. You know,
Right.
we know there's a gap in services, but for our exam, that's what happens. There's a handoff. No break in services, no gap in services, because we know this is exam. It may not be your world. This is exam. We know that people are more likely to commit suicide when they're in a state of feeling well, a manic type of situation. I just got the energy to do it. I got the mindset to do it. And then they really want to do it. That's when they'll do it. So yeah. So let's take a 5 minute break. I'll get back into a couple more 50 topics, and then we're going to jump into assessment, intervention, and treatment planning, and then we'll get into some practice questions to end. If y'all have any questions for me, just put them in the chat, and I'll look at them while we're on break.
Okay. What about now? Okay.
All right, everybody.
Here.
Awesome. So let's look at another topic, danger to others. We have TerraSoft versus the Board of Regents. That's legal literature we all should know. Does anybody remember what TerraSoft versus Board of Regents was? Well, is?
Yes.
All right, what does that law state?
That basically we have a duty to warn if we're knowledgeable of someone being in danger or harm or a threat to someone else.
Yes.
We have a duty to warn.
That's exactly right. Let me throw a caveat in there. What if you have a client who has HIV and AIDS, right? And they tell you that they're sleeping with this person. Do you have a duty to warn that person?
No.
Okay, tell
No.
me.
Well, we do have a duty to protect though, right?
We do have a duty to protect. That's correct.
Yeah, so like if harm is being inflicted on that victim, well then again we got to think about confidentiality purposes too. Right?
There you go. There you go. It's a
Yeah,
complex
so
question. That's why I asked it.
yeah.
I noticed, Antoine, with questions like that on the test, if I could, you said that earlier, but if I could remember, a lot of it was, what does your jurisdiction say?
Yep. Yep.
Mm.
And if they have the answer to pick
Mm-hmm.
what's in your jurisdiction, I would pick it.
That's your answer. Yeah.
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 But in this case, this is a very clear law and has
Mm-hmm.
distinctions in how we should proceed. So we do have to protect the client's right to confidentiality, even if they have HIV and AIDS. So we would not disclose that up under this law, except if a person tells us that they're using their HIV and AIDS to weaponize it against another person. So if they say, I know I have HIV and AIDS, and I'm gonna get him back, I'm gonna go have sex with him, then we're talking about TerraSoft versus the Board of Regents, right? What about if you're in court and the judge wants you to release records in court that has that a person is HIV and AIDS positive and they did not want anybody to know? What should you
Advocate to not divulge that information.
Right.
advocate to not divulge it? What if the judge says, I still want it?
And then you have to give it.
So for your exam, what you would ask is to have the information kept under seal. So judge, so I'm not held in contempt of court. I want to release it. Can I have it kept under seal? What kept under seal means is that we can take the record, we can take us a permanent marker, and we can cross out the HIV and AIDS information, and still give that to the court. That's called information being kept under seal. Okay. Now here's the quagmire to this. The judge may say, no, I don't want it kept under seal. I want to see everything. Then you have, as a social worker, an option. You can still not share it and uphold confidentiality, or you could be held in contempt of court because you did not want. There is a lady who has done that before. She went to jail for 30 days, got 3 kids. She said, Judge, I'm not going to share it. He held her in contempt of court. She went to jail for 30 days. Because legality and ethics are two different things. Our ethics board is not a legal board. So technically, you could do something that's ethical and it be illegal, right? Or you could do something that's legal and it not be ethical. So you could, by all rights, because legally the judge says divulge that information, and you divulged it to the court, and then your client sued you, and they reported you to the board, and then the board says what you did was unethical because you broke what?
Confidentiality.
Confidentiality. That can't happen. So I just say that to draw the distinct differences between the two. For your social work exam, they're usually not going to make you draw that difference. They are going to ask you a question like this as it pertains to confidentiality. In particular, this law. This law is about weaponizing yourself or something else with the intent to hurt somebody else. That's what this is about. And as long as a person is not doing that, you cannot divulge that information to anybody. They're not weaponizing. They may say, my life's goal is to go throughout life and see how many people I can infect with this HIV and AIDS. That's my goal. They haven't specifically addressed anybody, even though they're public health risk. Doesn't mean I can go tell the world they got HIV and AIDS. Like I want to do some other therapeutic interventions, but I can't divulge that information.
I have a question on that one.
Sure.
So they went to and I'm just maybe I'm overthinking it. They went to the health department, they got diagnosed with HIV or AIDS.
Yes.
Wouldn't you think that the health department would send out something to his partners to indicate what's going on?
They do that, they get sued.
Wow.
Yeah.
And most of the time they will tell that person to inform their partners.
Yeah, they just encourage them to. But if they send that information themselves, you're talking about a lawsuit. Yeah, because they did not weaponize it. Now, if they told somebody at the health department, I just found out, and the person just found out and said, okay, I'm glad I got it. So now I can go make sure my husband got it. That's different because they weaponized it. But just the fact that they found out, right? You can't tell, even just because you have the information. It's just like if you had a child in your office, the child told you that they were pregnant. Just because they're pregnant don't mean that you can divulge that information to their parent. You're bound by confidentiality unless it's some of those situations I named: suicide or homicide, child abuse and neglect. That person is incapacitated. Right? Now I want to encourage them to tell their parents, or if they would have told me that they're pregnant and their pregnancy is putting them at risk for harm, then I can divulge. But just saying I'm pregnant, as bad as you may want to tell mom this from this 12-year-old child, right? And so sometimes agencies will get around that. They'll put in writing that in certain, in these situations, mom is privy to know this information. The child, can agree on it. And sometimes when they if they're like really young, like 7, 8, it just depends on your jurisdiction, certain ages. Then you just, without their consent, you can go ahead and divulge it. But primarily for your exam, you're bound to confidentiality, even with children. What about involuntary hospitalization? Y'all talk to me about what that is. What are the implications for that?
Suicide,
Mm-hmm.
suicidal, manic,
aggression, a danger to others.
Mm-hmm.
Gravely disabled.
Say that again, Darian.
Gravely disabled, when unable to care for themselves.
Yes, absolutely. So, in what circumstances can we get people hospitalized?
All the above.
All the above.
A threat to themselves or others.
Yes. For how long can we get them hospitalized?
Well, that's not,
minimum of 72 hours.
right? So a maximum of 72 hours. What do we call that?
assessment.
A piece, yeah,
PEC.
yeah.
So close Darion. So if we do 72 hours, we call it a CEC,
PEC.
coroner's emergency certificate. If we do 24 hours, we call that what Darion just said, PEC, physician emergency certificate. So we can PEC easily, 24 hours. Coroner's certificates are harder to get, harder to prove. But if you can typically
It is.
prove a threat to somebody in themselves, you can PEC them for 24 hours. But you need a coroner to sign off if you want to do more than 24 hours. So we got a PEC and a CEC.
Isn't there a, not sure the acronym, but there's like a judicial or judge something, one.
Yeah, there is a level up. I forgot what you call it. You would never see that on your exam.
No, I've never seen it on an exam. I just,
But
I've
yeah,
learned
there
about
is.
it before.
There is one where the judge can override.
Oh.
Yeah, the judge can override the medical information, but they gotta have a lot of like history and stuff like that before they can do that. But you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. All right. Let's see what time it is. Okay, so I'll do one more and then we'll jump into assessment and diagnosis. So crisis intervention. What's the main focus for crisis intervention?
Return to baseline functioning.
Yes, return to baseline functioning.
Diligent.
Yes, yes. What is a crisis?
Everybody's
How do you know?
definition of a crisis is different.
Yeah, I'm just about to say that.
Yeah, everybody's crisis is different. So, but tell me for your exam, what you think a crisis is. You're right, Darion.
Anything that throws off their daily norm, their daily function.
I'm cleaning it out.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, for your exam, a crisis is any time a person's coping skills no longer works. That's what a crisis is for your exam. When your coping skills no longer work, you're in a crisis.
That's what we call my nephew, never told.
And there are different types of crises. So, two you should know for your exam. One is what we call a maturational crisis. Maturational, we get the word mature. This is just like normal stress of life. Like you just got married, you just had a child, maybe you've just retired. Those are natural courses of life. And you got a crisis because of that. We call that maturation, you're maturing through life. The other one is situational. That is more around a sudden traumatic event. Hurricane Katrina, I remember working at. Loss of a loved one, loss of a job, sudden illness. So we have maturation, we have situation. And so from those two, we have what you call crisis theory. So if you don't know crisis theory, please study that. But the premise of crisis theory is that people's coping skills no longer work. Our responsibility is to help restore them back to baseline functioning as close as possible. Help them to develop new problem-solving skills, and then like mobilizing support. So on your exam, when you see crisis, some of the answers that you should pick are going to mention stuff like therapy. Whenever you see crisis, you don't want to pick therapy. You don't want to pick anything long-term. You want stuff that's immediate and around safety. Immediate and around safety. Right? So for those of you all taking the LCSW exam, because you're going to have more reasoning types of questions, they probably would ask you what would be the best thing that you would do. And so you would put somebody in, eventually refer them out for therapy, right, to deal with their trauma. But when you see that best situation, if you see safety answers in any of those questions, always pick it. I don't care what the rest of the question answers are. If you have a crisis question and they're asking you, what's the best thing you should do? And in those answers, you see something addressing safety, always pick it. That is just a rule of thumb for your exam, period. If it's a crisis situation and in your answers you see safety, go ahead and pick it. Don't trick yourself out of picking another answer thinking, no, you see crisis and one of the answers is safety. Go ahead and pick it. Go ahead and pick it. Because that's exactly what we're doing in crisis. The moment you're not working on getting a person stabilized through safety, it's not crisis intervention anymore. You've moved out of crisis intervention. All right. Questions about crisis intervention? Okay, awesome. Y'all doing good so far? Okay, awesome.
Mhm.
I have a question going back
Yes.
to the intervention model. You were stating that whenever you see the crisis, you do not select the long-term option, more so you're fixing for the short term, right? For immediate,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yes. Because they're gonna put like clockwork, they're gonna put that in there. Like, and they don't normally do this with test questions. But if I'm picking something that's long term, it's because in my scenario, they're going through the situation and they've said something like, this person has coping skills that work. If they got coping skills that work, we're out of crisis intervention. And now I can start talking about therapy. But I'm not scheduling any therapy appointments. I'm not referring them for therapy appointments when it's crisis. It's all about safety. It's all about safety. Around those two types of crises, maturational, situational. I'm trying to get this person back to a baseline, back to an equilibrium. And that word equilibrium comes from what theory? Equilibrium.
Where does equilibrium come from, babe? Let me see.
She got her help over there. Help me. Equilibrium. What theory does that come from? I know you got it there, and I see it. It's right there.
It's on the tip of my tongue. I'm wanting to say family system, but I'm
You got one word right. Just leave one out.
system.
Systems theory.
Systems
Systems
theory.
theory, which is a theory we all got to know. Has the term equilibrium. Means that people return to a baseline state of behavior. They're balanced, right? Equilibrium. So when we're talking about crisis theory, that's what we're doing, helping people to establish an equilibrium. Most people are not going to return back to where they used to be. We're just trying to get them as close as possible. When they've established an equilibrium, we're not in crisis theory anymore. All right. All right, so let's move on to intervention planning, assessment, treatment planning. Everybody's favorite. Who likes diagnosis and assessment?
I do.
Okay. Some people love mental health.
If I like it that much, I'm just really good at it. I'll say that. It's like
That's even better.
it's a strong area.
That's even better. Some people are natural clinicians. For the rest, this looks like Greek and Hebrew. But you just need to get an idea, like a general idea of what goes in each category. So whether you're taking the LMSW or whether you're taking the LCSW, you need to know the DSM-5, right? Especially the LCSW, because it's the biggest portion of your exam. So let me go over some highlights. I'm sharing this from my study manual. Let me go. Let's see where I want to start. Yeah, so some assessment methods. So technically, when we are talking about assessment, intervention, and treatment planning, we're talking about like steps. So like the first step would be the actual assessment. The second step, and those who worked in mental health naturally know this. The second step would be the actual treatment plan, right? Then the third step would be the documentation of notes, note taking, right? And then we would just go back through that process again through what we would call a reassessment, a reevaluation of the treatment plan, and continuous documentation. So assessment, which then a treatment plan follows from the assessment, because my assessment is going to have a couple of things. And on a treatment plan, my treatment plan is going to have goals, objectives, interventions. And I'm going to actually have somebody working that treatment plan, which is going to have documentation, and then back into a reassessment. All right, so when we're assessing a person's needs, there's a couple models that we should be familiar with when we're talking about assessment. So the traditional one is, and the one that we probably see on the exam a lot, is what we call the medical model. The medical model. The medical model is around this word, which we want to be familiar with, we call pathology. All pathology means is we're trying to find out what's wrong. So the assessment is around finding out what's wrong. Most assessment tools are from the medical model. I'm asking you questions to find out what's wrong. Then there is more of a popularized type of assessment that we see a lot, that we call the strengths-based model. So it's not that we're just focusing on what's wrong. We're also focusing on like what's right, or things like other opportunities the person may have. What are their capabilities, their capacities? So we can use those as building blocks to help this client move forward. And then there is the narrative or storytelling model, which will be on somebody's exam. This is when we are focusing on allowing the client to tell their story. So test question, what population are we going to use narrative or storytelling with the most?
People of color.
That's actually true. Not necessarily for your exam, but that is a true fact.
Children.
Okay, so we're actually going to go in the opposite direction. So narrative or storytelling
It's middle-aged.
is the elderly. The elderly, right? That's who we normally focus this type of assessment towards.
Oh, yeah,
right?
that makes sense.
Instead of checklists and questionnaires. So we let them talk. So they said 1973, I remember. And so we let them go through that narrative, and then we draw inferences and conclusions based on what we told them. We don't give them a checklist. I ain't giving a checklist to a 70-year-old. I want them to tell me, how did you get started doing that? Like, what happened between this time and that time? How were you feeling and thinking when that happened? I want them to tell me my story. That's a narrative storytelling. And for your test, we primarily use that for the elderly population. Or, I probably don't need to say elderly. Let's change the word out. Our seasoned saints. That's what we use it. All right. And so inside of that assessment, there are some things that y'all are already familiar with, like social history. I definitely got to identify the problem, and I want to get that from the client's perspective. I'm going to gather other records from other people that client is engaged, other systems. We call that third-party information. Here is something that's super important. I'm going to use assessment instruments to gather information. Now, you may not use any of these instruments in your current practice, but you need to know these for your exam. So we have what we call non-standardized assessment tools. Like, and y'all may remember this from grad school, especially from some of you all who just graduated, like an eco map. Y'all remember the eco map? You did like the circles and lines to show the
Yes.
relationship between people and their
Family
networks.
members.
Yeah. Yeah. So you may use an eco map. So that when you see circles, the word circles and lines, we're talking about an eco map. Like a straight line may be a good relationship. Like a dotted line may be a contentious relationship. Maybe I'll do a line, put an X through that, means that this is a severed relationship, but it's an eco map. We also use what you call sociograms. This is strictly around looking at social relationships between people. What's the interaction between father and son, between mother and husband? Sociogram. The more popular one is the genogram. The genogram. So when it's a real genogram, it's 3 generations. So usually, circle, I believe, is a female, square is a male, and then we draw 3 generations. What we're trying to see is generational patterns, like birth order. Is there? I almost got churchy. I was about to say generational curses. Is there diseases that happen between this generation and that generation? Like we're
Yeah, we
looking
were
for
taught to
patterns.
we were taught to look for like patterns of behavior and
Yeah.
stuff like hereditary things too.
Yes. Yes. Like does diabetes run in this family in these 3 generations? There, there's, and we'll talk about some of those in a second. There's certain diagnoses that are hereditary. Like what are some of those diagnoses that's hereditary?
PhD.
ADHD. Mm-hmm.
Depression.
Depression,
What else?
Suicidal.
schizophrenia.
Schizophrenia.
Yeah, schizophrenia. Yeah, those are all hereditary. And so when we say hereditary, what we're talking about is people have a predisposition. And predisposition simply means that there is a genetic code that's passed down on the genes to the next generation. It doesn't mean that the person will actually have the diagnosis, but they are strongly predisposed to it. And so normally what we know that triggers that diagnosis, if it is on the gene, is overwhelming amounts of stress, medical trauma, something like that. Drugs and alcohol can trigger it. So we're looking for that in our genogram. We talked a little bit about suicide risk already, but for our exam purposes, the idea here is that when we have identified it, we are developing no harm contracts, right? And when would we implement a no harm contract?
When
During the
the
assessment. Yeah.
patient has
The
history of
suicidal history. Mhm.
Right? Suicidal history. What do we have to see from the client to implement a no harm contract? So I heard somebody say history. Obviously, if they've had a history of suicide, that's number one. Because we say that's the number one reason why. Why else? Why we do a no harm contract?
is there a risk, high risk?
Yeah, they just flat out having suicidal thoughts. So they have suicidal thoughts. We want to do a no harm contract, right? And there's a difference, right, between suicidal ideation, which is suicidal thoughts, and suicidal intent. Those are 2 things you're looking for in this area. What's the difference between suicidal ideations and suicidal intent?
Ideation is that they had thoughts about it, and the intent is that they had an actual plan.
They got a plan. So if they have suicidal thoughts with no plan, we do a no harm contract. If they have suicidal thoughts with a plan, it's hospitalization. Right? Remember that for your exam. If it's just the thoughts, it's a contract. If it's a plan, like I'm going to go slit my wrist, it's hospitalization. You might not always do that at your regular job for the sake of the exam. That's what they expect us to say. That's what they expect us to know. All right. And so, forgot about this for the exam. So there are some suicide assessments out there. What are some of the suicide assessments we should know?
The Columbia.
Columbia screener.
That's number one, the CSSR, Columbia Suicide Severity Something Scale. What else?
Go ahead, Darren, on that suicide team.
Oh, yeah, Darren, tell us what we're supposed to be using, Darian. I forgot you.
Yeah,
That's the one we
Dr.
didn't
Bird,
really
that was
use.
that was a
Okay.
long term, man. Can you say that again? I'm misspelling
C-
words over everything.
CSSR. That's all. It's the Columbia Suicide Severity. What's the R, Darian? You remember? Oh, rating scale. Yeah, Columbia Suicide Severity Rating Scale. We call it the CS. Nobody says what I just said. We just call it the CSSR. Yeah.
Okay, that sounds like ISS, so I can do that. Yes, indeed. So I can remember that.
Or the in school suspension.
That's what Pastor for. I done click somebody ain't supposed to click. Lord Jesus. Oh, oh Lord. Okay. So there's also the ASQ. For ASQ. You need to know that for your exam. The ASQ. You know those two, you good.
You said a ASQ?
ASQ. Q is in question.
Never heard of that one. Okay.
Yes, the assessment and suicide questionnaire. There's a couple, they got quite a few other ones, but those are just the two you need to know for your exam.
Okay.
So we talked about non-standardized genograms, sociograms, ecograms. Then there's standardized testing, which we use more, we're more familiar with. So standardized testing when we're doing assessment with people. So we have psychiatric evaluations. You'll need to know these for your exam, especially those taking the master's exam. If I'm measuring a person's intelligence, I would take an IQ test. The one that we give for children is called the WISC. WISC. You'll remember that when you see it because the C is there, the child. We give the adults a different one called the WISE. WAIS. That stands for Wechsler Intelligence Scale for Children and Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale. Just remember the acronym. It's all you need to know for your exam. I'm just giving you that for the sake of information. So IQ test, WISC, and the WISE. They have just changed it just in case this is on somebody's exam. They changed it. Well, I should say just changed, but they did change it a few years ago. When you would take an IQ test, whatever your score was your IQ. Right? That's no longer how it works. Now, if you take an IQ test, they take your score and they partner it with what we call adaptive functioning. Adaptive functioning. So it's your score and adaptive functioning. So adaptive functioning, I'll give you an example of what that means. Let's say little Jimmy scored a 71 on his IQ test. So for us, that means that he would have intellectual disability, and the specifier would be mild mental retardation. I'm sorry. Mild mental retardation, right? But let's say we found out little Jimmy has a lemonade stand in his neighborhood. He's making money, he's doing business, he's interacting with people. He's highly functioning in his neighborhood. Well, we're going to take that into consideration and bump Jimmy's score, right? So it's the IQ test accompanied with adaptive functioning. We didn't used to do that. Now we do. So we are kind of offsetting the bias of an IQ exam. Because there's some people who take an IQ test and they have a low score, but they're way smarter than what the score indicates. Okay. So no whisk, no wise. That is a test question. If I was assessing a person's personality, I would use the MMPI. Don't worry about what it stands for. Just remember that acronym. You're going to remember it because of the P, the PI, personality inventory. Personality inventory. All right, give me just a second. Right. So if I was assessing depression, there's a few I would use, but you definitely need to know the Beck depression inventory. What are some other assessments for depression?
The PHQ-9.
Yes. Patient Health Questionnaire 9. You want to know that. Want to know Beck. You want to know the PHQ-9. All right. If I'm assessing ADHD, what are some exams I should know? Some assessments I should know. Excuse me.
Vanderbilt.
Vanderbilt, please. Vanderbilt. Another one is what we call the Connors. Connors. Anybody used any of those scales before? Vanderbilt, the Connor?
No, I've never.
Yeah, we use it now. We also have to do it for their teachers as well.
Yes.
Yeah. Vanderbilt.
The Vanderbilt pastor?
Yeah, Vanderbilt. Yes, sir.
Okay. Because they got versions of it. They have a teacher version, they got a parent
Parent
version,
and then
child
the
version.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So that's some of our standardized testing. And then we have our mental status examination. You got a full-blown mental status, and then you have what you call a mini mental status exam. The mini one is just not all of the questions, but especially like CSW people, there are some terms that you really want to be familiar with. Okay, so let's look at the headings for the mental status exam. So some domains you'll see: appearance, self-explanatory; attitude, self-explanatory; behaviors, right? If you've noticed that a person has catatonia. What's catatonia?
When they're like kind of dazed off, if you will, like they're not in tune with reality.
Okay, so catatonia, write this
No
down,
movement.
has to do with my muscles.
Yeah, no
Oh,
movement.
yeah, you're right. I'm thinking about gosh, it's on the tip of my tongue. Go ahead. But
Yeah.
you're right.
So this is when I have rigid muscle movements. So catatonia is akin to schizophrenia. So if you ever seen somebody with schizophrenia and they kind of maybe move like this, we call that catatonia, right? I'm watching for that when I do an assessment. If they have like purposeful movements like head banging their head on stuff, head rocking, what diagnosis am I probably looking at?
Yeah, so what do you hang out at?
If I see head banging, head rocking, eye gazing back and forth, what am I probably looking at? Autism. Autism. It's a key feature of autism, right? I'm looking at mood and affect. Mood and affect. Everybody wants to know this. So when I say a person's mood, mood is what they describe in their own words. Or Shabella, how are you feeling today? I feel good. Mood. It's an internal state. What I observe is called affect. Mood is what the client describes. Affect is what I see. And so we use certain words for affect. I may say that a person has a neutral affect. It's fairly balanced. I may say they have a euthymic affect. It's a normal mood. I may say that they have a dysphoric affect. This means that they're depressed. Euphoric means something going on where they're out of this world, probably on drugs or alcohol. I may say that they have an apathetic affect. It means that they're indifferent, right? I may say that they have anhedonial, which everybody should know. Inability to experience pleasure. Affect. All of these, mood and affect, is consistent with certain diagnoses, right? All right, so affect is more about non-verbal behavior. Mood is about the verbal behavior they give me. I'm looking at speech. Speech. How fast they're speaking. Are they speaking with rhythm? Are they stuttering? Do they have, and these are words for your exam, echolalia? You ever been in a room with somebody who they finish, like your sentences for you, or they say what you're saying, they repeat what you say? We call it echolalia. Like, hey man, how you doing? Hey man, how you doing? They say what you say. We call it echolalia, right? Or they may have what we call palilalia. This is the person repeating their own words. They say something and then turn around and say the exact same thing. These are all akin to schizophrenia. And no, it doesn't have to just be schizophrenia, but we see that in schizophrenia. They have neologisms. I had a supervisor who had this. Neologisms is when people make up their own words that's not in Webster's dictionary. I had a supervisor, I'd be like, how you doing, man? He's like, yeah, I'm shop propping. And I was like, shop propping. He's like, yeah, I'm shop propping. But that was his own. So what I got is I got like a little piece of paper and I just started writing down all these little words he was saying because they actually had meaning. They have meaning to nobody else but him. They're called neologisms. Neologisms. All right. The process.
Sounds like so.
The person's insight, judgment. So, if I say prognosis, what do I mean by prognosis?
The likely outcome.
The likely outcome. So if I say somebody has a fair prognosis, what does that mean?
They may not reach, like if we're talking about baseline of functioning, for example, they may not reach their natural baseline of functioning, but somewhere, close enough.
Right. So there's a 50-50 chance that they're going to reach their treatment goals. Absolutely right. From their established baseline behavior. If I say a person has a poor prognosis, what am I saying?
They're not going to get, the chances of them getting well is not likely.
Not that good, right? But if I say they have a good prognosis, the likelihood of them getting better is good. So prognosis is important. Prognosis is important. All right. I'll stop there for assessment and diagnosis for right now. I was going to get into some medications, but I'll wait till the next time. So, because I want to get into some test questions. All right, so this is what I want to do. This is the funnest part for y'all, because I know y'all have been waiting to do some test questions. No. Oh, no, that's not. Mm. All right. So what we're going to do, we're going to go over a few test questions. And what I'd like for you to do, I'm going to read the question, and then I want you to type your answer in the chat. And so the idea here is that we're learning how to break down the question. This is where we're going to end, and this is where we'll pick up in the next test prep class, breaking down questions. All right, and I'll go into more detail with this next time we meet. But for right now, what we're talking about is a system of breaking down questions, a system of breaking down questions, right? So I have a question in front of me, like how do I approach it? How do I approach it? So let's look at our first question. We'll talk a little bit about approaching this question, approaching this question. So when I have a question, there's a couple of things that I'm thinking about. One, I'm wanting to answer this question within a minute or two. If I'm having to spend technically more than 2 minutes on a question, I'm probably not prepared. Like you want to be moving at a pace between 1 to 2 minutes per question. There's also this process that I've got going through my head that I'm thinking about, right? So a couple of things. One, I'm thinking about what type of question this is. Is this human behavior in the social environment? Like, is this an ethics question? Is this direct, indirect practice? Is this assessment and diagnosis? I'm thinking about that. I'm also thinking about, is this a recall question? Recall just simply means that it just requires me to simply remember something, like a term, right? Or an idea or a concept. Is it an application question? That's when I would take a term and apply it in a certain situation, right? Like, so if I know what what term was I going to say? I can't even think. But let's just say I'm talking about alcohol dependence. Like I know what dependence is. That's recall. They ask me, well, what's alcohol dependence? So I know that's when somebody has withdrawals and tolerance. But when I can take alcohol dependence and apply it to a situation, that's an application question. And then the toughest type of question is a reasoning question. So not only do I know the concept, not only can I apply it, but there's multiple ways to look at what this means. So you normally know if you got a reasoning question because 2 of those answers can be right. So what I'm looking at is what's the rightest answer, if that's even a word. Right. So I'm thinking about that. If you're taking the master's exam, a lot of your questions are going to be recall and application. If you're taking the LCSW exam, a lot of your questions are going to be application and reasoning. We'll get more into this in the next test prep, but if you see at the top of this PowerPoint, there are some acronyms. Some people love acronyms to help them answer questions. I'm not really an acronym person, but some people are. So we do have 2 acronyms we'll get into more detail in. The first one is called SFARIAFI. That's what I'm using for questions that have modifiers. Just one of the things I'm looking for. Modifiers of like first, next, and last. I could use Fariafi, as Fariafi, safety, feelings, assess, refer, educate, advocate, facilitate, intervene. I would want to look at those, I want to do those things in that order. I'm doing first, next, last. Maybe I'm looking at a question that's what's best? What would you do? What's the best to do? What's the most important? I would use an acronym called ASPIRINS. Acknowledge the client and build rapport, assess, start where the patient is, check life, intoxicated, do not treat, rule out medical issues, informed consent should be obtained, and having a non-judgmental stance. We'll talk more about that in subsequent sessions. I put it at the top of the slide just to familiarize yourself with it. So I'm thinking about what type of question this is. It's recall, application, reasoning. Am I able to use one of my acronyms? Because there is a modifier. All right. So if we jump down to our actual question, every question has a STEM sentence. If you look at your ASWB exam guide that you all are going to download, it talks to you about what a STEM sentence is. The STEM sentence is the key sentence in the question. It actually tells you what we're talking about. It's not always the first sentence, but usually it is, right? So I'm looking for my STEM sentence because my STEM sentence is going to key me in on what I need to answer, how I need to answer. So let's just take this first question. We have a hospital social worker has been assigned to work with a 72-year-old man who wants to go home. That's my STEM sentence. It tells me a lot. First, I need to know about hospital social work. What's the population that I'm working with? A 72-year-old man, right? That's important to think about as I'm answering the question. It says in the rest of the question, it says in the rest of the question, he also, so I'll start over. Hospital social worker has been assigned to work with a 72-year-old man who wants to go home. It's the issue we got here. He also tells the social worker that his family wants him to stay in the hospital. What is the first thing that a social worker should do? Right? So you're a hospital social worker, your population, 72-year-old man, that's my STEM sentence. Then I'm looking for the issue, the problem, struggle. In this issue, what's the problem? In this sentence, what's the problem?
He wants to go home.
You want to go home, right?
But the family want to stay.
And the family wants him to stay. Yes, that's the issue. That's the problem. So if that's the issue and that's the problem, what would a hospital social worker do with a 72-year-old man? That's how I'm thinking about this question. Right? I have my problem. They want him to stay. He want to go. What capacity am I in? Because I'm thinking about this from first person. I'm not a child welfare social worker, a hospital social worker. Who is my population? 72-year-old man. What I do with a 72-year-old is going to be different than what I do with a 7-year-old, right? And here's what I'm always looking for next. It says, what is the first thing that a social worker should do? Now, in some test questions, that word first, which is a modifier, is bolded. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's capitalized. Sometimes it's not. You just got to be paying attention to it. Right? Anybody ever seen where it ain't capitalized and it ain't bolded on your exam?
Yes.
Yeah. So you got to be looking because modifiers, we'll talk more about modifiers. Modifiers change the tone of a question because in your mind, you may be thinking, I already know what I'm going to do. Until you keep reading, they say, okay, what you going to do first? I haven't changed what you were going to do. So it says, what is the first thing that a social worker should do? So if I want, I can use my acronym, SFARIAFI, because SFARIAFI works for first, next, last. Okay. And so my recommendation is that when you sit down in front of a question and you read, because you prepared, and you have an idea immediately after you read that question, what the answer is, if you go down to your answers and you see what you thought it is, go ahead and pick it. If I read it and you say, oh, that's Freud, that's Sigmund Freud, and you go down to the answers and see Sigmund Freud, pick it. Don't trick yourself. Don't play games with yourself. Well, is it really? Don't do that. Just go ahead and pick it and move on. That's your mind remembering, right? It's your mind remembering. So if you see it, don't even go through the process. Just go ahead and pick it. Okay? So let's look at this question. Hospital social worker, population 72 years old. Our problem is somebody wants him to stay, he wants to go. Right? So people have some rights here. You got to figure out, we got to know those rights. And then based on that, what I should do first, which clues me in that I can use, is Fariafi if I want. So let's look at our answers. So A says, talk with the family about their reasons for wanting him to stay in the hospital, which seems pretty reasonable because what I'm thinking about as I'm looking at my answers, are these reasonable based on the information that I know? If it does not sound reasonable, it's probably not going to be a good answer.
It's not the first thing either.
Right. Right, number 2, talk to the doctor about the man's condition. Letter C, explore the client's feelings. Or letter D, arrange for the client to be transferred to an assisted living facility. So this is what I want you all to do with this question. We're just doing it with this question. For each one of those questions, those answers, I want you to tell me where you all think each answer fits with S. Fariafi. So letter A says, talk with the family about their reasons for wanting him to stay in the hospital. Do y'all think that's safety, feelings, assess, refer, educate, advocate, facilitate, or intervene?
Yes.
Right? Somebody said assess. Okay. Okay, tell me where you think it's, whether you think it's safety, feelings, assess, refer, educate, educate. God, educate. Maybe that is a word. Advocate, facilitate, or intervene. Tell me which one of those you think it is before you answer. I know everybody knows that the answer is C, but I'm more focused on the way that you answer the questions right now. Okay, somebody said advocate.
You want us to put in chat?
You can put it in the chat or you can just say it.
Yeah.
Intervene.
Yeah, I'm gonna say A, advocate.
Okay. So this actually, so letter A would actually be an assessment. Why do I know it's an assessment? Because I'm gathering information from somebody. Whenever you see that on the exam, where you're gathering information, that's an assessment. Now, if I would have taken that information the client told me and said, he want to stay. So I want to talk to y'all about the reasons he needs to stay. Now I'm advocating for him, right? But if I'm just gathering information, I'm getting feedback, I'm getting perspectives, I'm in assessment. So this would be assessment. So I can literally just label letter A, assessment. All right. What about letter B, talking to the doctor about the man's condition?
That's also assessment.
And somebody said assessment.
Assessment, because isn't that gathering third party or second party information? First party.
Collateral.
Collateral.
Right. So letter B, y'all absolutely right. I'm still assessing. Which is not a bad option. All right. What about letter C?
Feelings.
Yeah, feelings.
Feelings.
Feelings. I'm checking in with his feelings. Okay. What about letter D?
Intervene.
Intervention.
Say
Thanks. So I have letter A, assess, letter B, assess, letter C, feelings, and letter D, intervention. If I did not know the answers to this, just because I understand social work process and I just used S. Fariafi, I could answer this question because they said, what would you do first? So I'm looking for the first thing you would do in social work process using that acronym, right? So that would be explore the client's feelings, right? Because remember, we're starting where the client is. So A is a good step, not the first step. D is not correct, it's the first step. And D may or may not be something that we do. Well, you sure that's a distractor. You sure not gonna do that one first. But it's back to social work process, right? Knowing that. And so even if I don't use S. Fariafi, if I don't use aspirins, I can use my generalist intervention model. I can use the helping process, whatever you call it, the generalist intervention model. You can use that model, right? Those 7 steps. This is going to bring me to the same result. So I'm going to engage. I'm going to assess. I'm going to plan. I'm going to implement. I'm going to evaluate. I'm going to terminate. I'm going to follow up. It's the same step. So I know with this guy, I'm in engagement. I'm in engagement, right? So let's move on to the next one. So what I want you to do, I want you to read the question and just put your answer in the chat, and then we'll talk about the question. All right. So let me read the question. I think everybody's answered. So an 18-year-old woman in treatment informs the social worker that she would like to have an abortion for an unexpected pregnancy. The first step the social worker should take is to, so obviously, because this is a shorter vignette, our first sentence is called our what?
Still.
Our STEM sentence, right? Who's my population?
18-year-old.
18-year-old. What's the problem?
She wants an abortion for unexpected pregnancy.
Right. There's an unexpected pregnancy. She's trying to find out if she can have an abortion. What's my modifier?
First.
First. All right. So I'd like for y'all to go through, doesn't matter who, go through your answers. I'm going to say letter A. And if you picked it, tell me why. If you didn't pick it, I'd like to hear from y'all why you didn't pick it. So letter A says, what did you say, baby? Okay. So thank you, baby. So letter A, tell me why you didn't pick letter A. Just everybody pick letter D.
Referring is the last thing you want to do. In most cases.
or tell her
Okay.
what to do.
Okay, so refer is an option. Okay. But y'all saying that ain't what you want to do first. Okay.
Mm-mm.
And what about B?
As telling her to, well, not telling her, but
Guiding her.
Yeah.
I just think that is guiding the patient to do an abortion if you sent them to an actual doctor who performs abortions. You kind of um, aiding her decision in a sense
Yeah,
Yeah,
without
but
doing it.
it's almost like you're not giving her like her right for self-determination in a sense.
Right.
Okay.
well, I we haven't done enough work yet before we could approach this option.
Okay. What
Think
other work
even
do you
though
think
she
may need to be done?
more in detail with the part of
Information.
questions or assessment or health wise, why,
I think even though she stated she wanted an abortion, it would still be a matter of us educating her on the various options and letting her know what's all available.
Okay.
And
Like
also
if a
so
client
they
come
get
in
more
asking like for
information.
resources for this situation, are we required to give it to them?
What do you think?
That's when you should refer out though, right? At that point. I mean, give them what information that you do have,
Give me
but
what yeah.
at that point it's out of your hands because it's out of your scope of practice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And with me personally, I would think my bias would get in the way of this.
That's a great observation. What are
Yeah,
you thinking about as far as your bias is concerned?
because I'm not
Christian.
for I'm not for abortion.
Right. Right.
Yeah, so
And this is why they put this question on the exam.
right, yeah. So
Believe your Christian belief. Um,
Hmm. Just your belief about the value of life is why they put this here. They want to make sure the bias blinders are taken off. So, so the correct answer to this is C. And so let's talk about why. So obviously we know A is not an option. That's called a distractor. Um, D, we're definitely not going to pick because I'm not referring a client to somebody that I recommended, right? She has options to seek treatment wherever she wants. So for me to refer her to an abortion doctor is out of my scope. I shouldn't be doing it. All right. So C and D are the ones that we're in between. So letter D is what we call a bias blocker. It looks innocent. It looks reasonable what you should do. But if I say aid the client and look at all reasonable options to her, that may be, and catch what's going on in this question. That's why understanding the STEM is so important. That may be a great option if she was 17. But the fact that she's 18 means
you're
that
an
she's established self-determination. So the moment that she told me that she wanted an abortion, that was her goal. That was her option. So for me to come back and say, well, let me let you look at some other options available. That's your bias. That's what will happen on this exam if we're not careful. So you got to throw away your paradigm, throw away your perspective, throw away your values here. The only values that matter on this exam is the NSW Code of Ethics. The only ones that matter on this exam. And so the moment she says, I want to do this, and you say, well, let's look at some other options, you're violating her self-determination. Does everybody see that? You don't see it initially, but do y'all see where they're going there?
Yes.
Right. And so C is the only one that fits as an initial step to help her explore ways to make that happen. Right. And so C and D look so similar. They just want to see if you'll pick D because of the blinder bias. That's what that question is about. The moment they said she was 18, she's an adult. So technically, if she ain't talking about killing herself, killing anybody else, child abuse and neglect, elder abuse and neglect, she's not incapacitated type of situations, we're supposed to help her get what she wants. Now, if you can't, then you're supposed to recognize that and then refer her out. Like Pastor Ford said, if that's against my bias and I'm not in the capacity to help you because of my bias, then I have a responsibility to refer you out. All right.
I'd like to point so that if the exam asks you a question as it relates to bias, and the options are you may have one to refer out, but the other one is to continue to do the work with the client. You continue to do the work with the client. Bias is aside.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Because they have refer or continue to work with the client. They'll have, I've seen where they have both of those answer choices on there, but that correct answer is to continue to work with that client because you have a responsibility to that client.
Absolutely right. Unless it's just a situation, and they may put that in a scenario where you're potentially harmful.
Right.
But if you're not harmful, then absolutely, it's a great point. You continue.
Right. Just because you have bias don't mean you get to refer out all the time.
Yeah. And then what they'll normally do, because they don't really try to make it too tricky. What they'll normally do, they'll have any options that if that's the situation, what do? You seek consultation, right? That'll normally be the answer you'll pick, is to get somebody else involved to help you with your bias, but not to make the client make the changes. You don't want to have to make the changes. It's a great point. Okay, let's do this last one. I know we're a couple of minutes over, but I did want to give y'all practice with a couple of them. All right, so a client in a family agency requests to see her records. The social worker should, so we see no modifiers. They are telling you what type of social worker you are. You're working in an agency, and this assumes that you got to know something about records. So letter A says, show the records if it will not harm the client. B, politely refuse. C, obtain a legal order permitting a social worker to show the records of the client. D, try to talk the client out of wanting to see the records. So let me do something different here. I want y'all to tell me what you think. You don't have to type it in, you can just tell me. Tell me, what do you think the distractor answers are? What is an answer that you see that you think may be obviously wrong?
D.
D. It's a
B.
distractor.
B. And D.
B and D, we can just throw them out. Like even though they put the word politely in front, we can't refuse people to see their records. Trying to talk them out of seeing their records, that violates their right to self-determination. All right, so we're between A and C. All right, so what are y'all thinking between A and C?
The correct answer?
A.
Yeah.
I would go with A.
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 A. Okay. No C.
Should it be a modifier or no? Should it be
Not
more
all the time.
ethical?
Not all the time is it going to be a modifier.
Okay.
And so when you don't see a modifier, I'm glad you brought that up, Tanisha. When you don't see a modifier, what you think in your head, think best. Just assume that it's there.
Okay.
Like if they don't give you a modifier, just be thinking in your head, what's the best option? Because that's what they're asking. They're just not putting a modifier. Yeah, it's a great point. All right, so everybody said A. Why not C?
I said C, Doc.
Oh, you said C? Okay, I'm sorry, Pastor. All right.
I would say not C because she doesn't need a legal order. It's her records. You know, every client is entitled to see their records. You know,
And Pastor, why not A?
Well, I mean, at that when I was reading over the question, it just sounded like that was like the best option to me during that
It's a
particular time.
Because you want to stay legal. You want to stay legal.
Right. Yeah, because you know, and a lot of times when you're dealing with records and stuff, you just want to make sure you're always, even if you're erring on the right side of things being legal and not illegal in a sense, if that makes sense. Like I said, that's how I was thinking.
It does. So so the actual answer is A. And so the assumption here is that we know how records go. So all you would do, Pastor Ford, in your notes when you studying for the exam, this would just be a learning, something that you will learn with records. So with records, a patient always has access to their records. It doesn't matter like what facility, what agency they are. But so and then we don't need anything, they don't need anything legal for that. But what's our responsibility when we release those records?
No harm.
It can't do any harm. And what do we mean by that?
If there's anything in the client's records that could potentially cause harm to them.
Like, give me some examples of what they may see, maybe from one of your notes.
Like maybe if it was a CPS case and the reporter was mentioned in the record.
Yeah, that's perfect example. Like that's Kim. Kim on the. Oh, okay, I got something for Kim. It's stuff, especially in smaller communities. Like you got people's names identified, and I would encourage everybody to stay away from this. But some people do it. I just believe in objective writing. If you have your judgment about a client's appearance, their affect, you may have put that the client was unkempt, means that they weren't groomed well. And they saw it in the note, but you be like, man, what you trying to say? I can't dress. Like that could be harmful, right? And so every client deserves. So what you can do legally, you can mark out stuff you don't want the client to see. Now they can refute that and say, "No, I want to see the whole record." You got to give it to them, but you can do that. You can do that. All right.
Which
So
one?
this tie into the safety acronym up here. I'm assuming.
Say it again, Pastor.
This tie into the safety acronym up here.
So this would be more of the aspirates because I'm thinking about what I would do. What's the best case situation? So I know I didn't go into that one. So that would be more of the aspirates.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And so here, the letter that I'm looking at is the last S is supporting the patient's self-determination. That's what I'm thinking about. Like they want their records. I got to help them get their records. And there's nothing legally that stops me and prevents me from giving them their records. That's a good question. Somebody else was saying something?
That was me.
Oh, go ahead, man.
Sometimes there's also a portion of the records that the parent or the client is asking for, and that could also be done like in a summary because it's more so the information that they're looking for, maybe to give to a doctor or to the school or something of that nature. It doesn't have to necessarily be the actual physical record every time.
Yeah, which is what I would try to turn them to first before I gave them the actual record, which is a great point. A summation of what's happened. Can we give them a summary? But if they actually ask for the actual note you wrote, you got to give it to them. But absolutely, I'm trying to keep them away from as much information as possible. And sometimes you may give them information they just may not understand, which is why the summary is important. They may have all that clinical language, they don't know what that is. Go ahead, Lakeisha.
Also, a term that I came across was asserting privilege when like lawyers ask for the records and contacting the client first before releasing any information to the lawyers.
Yes, that's a great point. Because we get scared when the lawyers put something in the mail and we try to get them everything they asking for. And they will use those threats of intimidation to try, but their our job is not to protect their confidentiality. It's to protect the clients. And so like even y'all, and it just is for knowledge for your test. Like even if you get a court order, like you don't I'm sorry, a subpoena, you don't have to respond to subpoenas. I know people do because we just don't like to see stuff coming from the judge, but you do have to respond to a court order, which is a difference. Court orders, yeah, you better be there early. Subpoenas, you don't have to. All right, so let's end here unless somebody else has another question. If y'all do, I'll answer it. If not, we'll pick up with answering questions next time. And then next time we meet, I want to get into some more HIPSI and community things. But I'll send y'all an email, which will be whatever the second Saturday in August is. I can't remember the date. We'll meet again. If I happen to meet before that, I'll let y'all know. But for those of you all who want certificates, please make sure you all email me. I'll get that to you within 7 days.
That's August, the second Saturday in August.
Okay, thank you, Pastor. All right. If no questions, I give y'all the rest of y'all Saturday back. That's why I like doing it early, so you still have your whole Saturday.
Thank you, Dr. Butler. It was amazing.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. For those of you, I think Darian, Shakorier, I think they may be the only people that's not on my mailing list. If y'all would like, I can put you on the mailing list so when I have subsequent sessions. You okay with that, Darian?
Yes, that's good.
Okay,
I
Shakorier.
think I'm already on there.
You're on there?
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Okay, well, I just put you on there. All right. Well, I'll talk to y'all soon. Y'all have a great rest of your Saturday.
Thank you.
Kamika, give me a call.
Bye.
Kamika, give me a call.